Asylum Dustin Milamor for Revolution News here at the Parliament Hill. Folks, oh well, Thursday marks the final day of the Emergency Act inquiry. And what, of course, guess who came to testify yesterday? Nonetheless, the Prince of Lies, Prime Minister Blackface McGruber himself. But of course, the rules are different for him as because why? Because he's the Prime Minister, of course, and he's a coward. And of course, here, folks, is that just basically is that instead of coming to the front door and what he did instead, he's knocked to the building through the back door, so that well, independent journalists like yours truly won't able to scrutinize him. I get it, because obviously that guy has been lying for multiple times. I mean, like, that guy lied multiple times on the record, and of course he even denied calling unvaccinated people names. But of course, just check out that exchange with Eva Chipyok and Prime Minister Blackface McGruber. Check it out.
Correct?
Yes.
And you are aware that this commission has received evidence from the police and other witnesses that on Monday, February 14th, the Ambassador Bridge was reopened, as was Coots. All the borders were reopened, correct?
Yes, and there was concern that more locations were going to be closed. Coots didn't open till Tuesday.
Okay, well, we'll review the record for that. On the Sunday night, February 13th, there was an IRG meeting and you were there. And in fact, you were the chair of that meeting. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at the IRG meeting, you were advised that there was a breakthrough agreement between the Mayor of Ottawa and the convoy organizers to move trucks out of the downtown residential areas. Isn't that correct?
That is not how I remember it, no.
Okay, well, I can advise you that at the inquiry, it was confirmed by the documents your officials filed here and by witnesses, namely Jody Thomas. She confirmed that at that IRG meeting, you were briefed that there was an agreement with the mayor. Does that, do you recall that?
With whom? With the mayor and who?
Some of the convoy organizers.
Which ones?
Well, Tamara Leach, who's present here in this room, signed a letter. It was made publicly available on the news on Sunday, February 13th, and you were advised of that agreement at the IRG meeting.
And we were also advised that that agreement wasn't holding and that many of the convoy had decried it as fake news and not actually an agreement that they would abide by.
And you learned that on Twitter, is that correct?
No, we learned that at the IRG.
By whom?
By our elected officials.
Thanks. And now you should be aware that this commission has also received evidence from city officials and others that the next day, on Monday the 14th, over 100 protest vehicles had moved out of the downtown residential areas under the mayor's agreement prior to your 4:30 p.m. announcement invoking the Emergencies Act. Is that right?
I can't speak to that, but I'm sure others have or will.
They have. And you are aware of the evidence before this commission from police officials and others who testified that the efforts by the truckers to further vacate the downtown residential areas under the mayor's deal were blocked by the police on both Tuesday and Wednesday, February 15th and 16th. Are you aware of that?
No, I am not. My understanding was the police were allowing anyone who wanted to leave to leave.
Okay. Would you agree with me that it would have been a far better outcome if you and your colleagues would have allowed the DA a statement about how the government's COVID mandates and lockdowns disrupted her life? Starting at paragraph 3, she said, "The truckers and the Canadians who lined the roads, overpasses, and highways restored the hope that I had almost lost. These patriotic Canadians told me that I am not alone, that I matter. I will never forget the hope and pride I felt watching these amazing truckers driving along Canadian highways, crowded with Canadians flying their flags and holding their signs of support. I will never forget the tears I shed as I regained that almost lost hope, that love for my home and native land, that love for my fellow Canadians." At page 235, Ottawa resident Karen Hanna, who obtained a sociology degree from Ottawa University, starting at paragraph 5, stated, "For months, the leader of our country publicly shamed people like me and my husband. Our own family members turned on us, blamed us, and some even told us we don't deserve health care." Paragraph 17, "One of my most emotional moments was dancing on Rideau Street beside a local man. He had tears streaming down his face. All he wanted was a hug. It was very overpowering for him. I met a girl, 22 years old, who just hopped in her car from Winnipeg and just kept driving. She stayed the entire time. I met people who were like family to me, people who gave up everything to come to Ottawa for justice and an explanation." At page 116, here is one of many, many concerned parents and spouses. Sam Crozier at paragraph 8 says, "I am not asking for help. I am begging you to please listen, hear my heart, feel my pain, and help work towards the true North strong and free that we were promised. My husband, an Army veteran who now has PTSD, and not from anything he has seen or done in the forces, but from what our own government has done. Our government has destroyed my life. I, a once optimistic, full of life person, find myself struggling to stay above water now. I struggle to find joy in anything and daily fear a new announcement being made that will further punish us. I have written the same email to every member of Parliament daily and been ignored by a large collection of the people meant to be our leaders, meant to be listening to us. Mr. Prime Minister, you have now heard the statements from some of the many concerned Canadians who felt compelled to support the protesters. Do you now understand the reason so many Canadians came to Ottawa with such resolve in the midst of a harsh, cold Canadian winter because of the harms caused by your government COVID mandates, and they wanted to be heard?"
I am moved, and I was moved as I heard these testimonies, as I saw the depth of hurt and anxiety about the present and the future expressed by so many people. The COVID pandemic was unbelievably difficult on all Canadians. And my job throughout this pandemic was to keep Canadians safe. And the way that I chose to do that was to lean on public health officials, lean on experts and science on the best way to keep Canadians safe. And because Canadians got vaccinated to over 80%, we had fewer deaths in Canada than places that didn't reach that. And every heartbreaking story I hear of a family who sat beside the bed of a loved one dying because they had believed that the vaccines were more dangerous than the disease, I take personally, because I wish I could have done more
And
to
I don't mean
convince people
to cut
to
you
get
off,
vaccinated.
but I only have 10 minutes, so thank you. That was helpful. A number of people have testified in this inquiry referencing your widely published comments and calling the unvaccinated racists and misogynists. And we have heard testimony in this inquiry about how some of your officials wanted to label protesters as terrorists. Would you agree with me that one of the most important roles of a prime minister is to unite Canadians and not divide them by engaging in name calling?
I did not call people who were unvaccinated names. I highlighted there is a difference between people who are hesitant to get vaccinated for any range of reasons and people who deliberately spread misinformation that puts at risk the life and health of their fellow Canadians. And my focus every step of the way, and the primary responsibility of a prime minister, is to keep Canadians safe and alive.
Right. So in terms
And to us, we had more questions about how it would actually work. It was not a complete proposal.
my last question, Mr. Prime Minister, when did you and your government start to become so afraid of your own citizens?
That's a very
I am
unfair.
not, and we are not.
So there you have it there, folks. You can just see from there that Trudeau denied that he called unvaccinated people names because obviously the evidence is clear. Remember when he did an interview with a French mainstream media, and of course, well, over there, he specifically said that unvaccinated people were racist, misogynist, and of course, he even said that, do we tolerate these people? He said those words in French, but thankfully, there was a subtitles, i.e., thankfully, there is a English subtitles to it. So, obviously, this dude denies everything of what he did and constantly lies. Well, nothing new, but of course, just check out some other factor that happened yesterday at Trudeau's testimony at the inquiry. Check it out.
Things going on in BC and Surrey, like there was a sense that this was a broadly spread thing, and the fact that there was not yet any serious violence that had been noted was obviously a good thing, but we could not say that there was no potential for threats of serious violence, for serious violence to happen over the coming days. We were seeing things escalate, not things get under control.
Okay. You mentioned there that the Ambassador Bridge was on its way to resolution in a sense, and Coots was on its way to resolution. One of the things that's come up in the evidence is that at this juncture, Ottawa could also perhaps have been said to be on its way, perhaps at an earlier stage, to resolution, in the sense that a plan, an integrated plan for policing and was coming together at that point. And that may not have been something that was clearly expressed on the 13th to the IRG and or cabinet. So first I wanted to ask you what your understanding of that situation was at the time.
First of all, from the beginning, from the approach of the very first weekend, we heard from various authorities and police of jurisdiction, don't worry, we got this. There's a plan. There's a plan, and for the second weekend, there was a plan. And we have a plan for this, and it's not going to happen, and we've got this, we're getting more resources. No, there's a plan. We kept hearing there was a plan. And even
the purported emergency cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. You're taking the position that the emergency declaration was justified in part because towing services were required and could not be procured. Is that accurate?
That's a bit of a leap. We say that the Emergencies Act was required because the situation as a whole could not be resolved under existing authorities and was not being resolved under existing authorities.
Right, but towing service procurement was part of that total picture that you're talking about, wasn't it?
One of the barriers that we heard regularly from police of jurisdiction to removing the trucks occupying various locations was the difficulty in securing towing services. Yes, that was one of the barriers they were facing in being able to restore public order.
Right. So one of the measures that you put in place through the emergency measures regulations was an ability to compel tow truck drivers to provide towing services, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
So I'd say that would be a fairly significant part of the reason why you would have had to invoke the Emergencies Act. Wouldn't you agree with that?
It was an element of the solutions to the situation that we were dealing with. Yes.
It was one of a handful of powers that you created using the emergency measures regulations. Is that right?
Yes.
So I would say it's relatively important. Would you agree with that?
It was important in yes, solving the emergency situation. Yes.
Certainly relevant to the invocation of the Emergencies Act?
The invocation of the Emergencies Act wasn't because people couldn't find tow trucks. The invocation was because there was a public order emergency that posed serious threats to Canadians, and the inability to solve this public order emergency that posed a serious threat to the safety of Canadians was compounded by the inability.
Heard about a threat assessment prepared by CSIS, and you're familiar with that as well. And Director Vigneault testified that he'd concluded, or CSIS had concluded, that there wasn't a threat to national security under 2C of the CSIS Act. He also testified that that threat assessment was provided to the IRG on February 13th. So my question is, was this threat assessment provided to the full cabinet on the evening of February 13th?
In our reporting to Cabinet, there was a reporting on the consensus reached by the IRG, including the director of CSIS, who recommended and agreed with the invocation of a public order emergency. We were not at Cabinet dealing with whether or not CSIS had the authority to move forward with a wiretap on one person or another. It was a discussion on the invocation of a public order emergency, which requires reasonable grounds for the governor and council to make a determination.
So you'd agree that that document was not provided to the full cabinet on February 13th? You said a report.
Which document is that?
The CSIS threat assessment. And if I could rephrase what you said, you just said the IRG considered that report, it discussed it?
No. Throughout the IRGs, CSIS, as a par for a course, would mention that the threshold had not been met for CSIS operations within this of a particular type, according to their context and their mandate. But we were not looking as an IRG or a cabinet as to whether or not CSIS would be allowed to do this or that thing. We were looking at, certainly by this end, whether or not we had a threshold met for the invocation of a public order emergency.
So Prime Minister, Director Vigneault testified that a written threat assessment was prepared by CSIS, and he testified that he provided that to the IRG.
Yes.
Are you saying that that document was not provided to the IRG?
No, that would have been provided to the IRG.
But would you agree that it wasn't provided to the full cabinet?
Yes, I agree that it was, that the report was given, that that the narrow CSIS threshold was not met for a CSIS operation.
So there you have it there, folks. You can just see that the man himself obviously didn't even bother to tell the truth when he swore on the stand, when he hold into the Bible and said that yes, he will solely tell the truth, nothing but the truth, but the whole truth. But of course, what can you expect from the Prince of Lies? I mean, from the biggest liar in Canada? Well, nothing. Because of course, this guy will just lie and lie and lie, as we've seen over and over and over every single day. That guy is an absolute disgrace. And you know what, here Trudeau? Resign. And of course, you're a big national disgrace. And one finally here, folks. Hashtag Trudeau must go. For Revolution News, I'm Asylum Justin Villamor. Folks, if you want to be kept up to date on what's happening at the Emergency Act Inquiry, including my live tweets and some clips and highlights that occurring at the Emergency Act Inquiry, by heading over to revolutionnews.ca/emergency act commission. That's revolutionnews.ca/emergency act commission. And of course, here folks, while you're there, please head over to donorbox.org/emergency act commission. That's donorbox.org/emergency act commission. And of course, here folks, if you could chip in a buck or two, that will be greatly appreciated, as it will help me cover my travel expenses, including my expenses on food, as bringing you these stories doesn't come for free. Thank you so much.